We'll be talking about microphones, but before we go there, I want to play you something. It's the same piano recorded with the same mic, just using two different techniques. Same piano, different technique. Okay, now why am I starting this session with this? It's obviously a grand piano, the Bosendorf, which I played to you before a few sessions ago. Same microphone, which if I remember well, it's AKG 414. Which large diaphragm condenser, we'll get to that just now. But the mics, we're just using a different technique. Can you hear the difference of tone? It's immense. And now, the reason why I'm using this as an example is that utilizing microphone can have such a huge impact on sound. And often people are not aware of it. But the right mic and the right position or the right technique can make a huge difference to your sound production, whether you're recording or whether you're going live. So hopefully by discussing microphones in these sessions, you will maybe have an understanding that will enable you to use them better. Okay, so let's start from the generic description. Would you have the question? Okay, but you could hear the difference. Okay, if you couldn't hear the difference, you need to leave. But the generic description of a microphone, we looked at it last time. It is an input transducer. What is an input transducer? It's a device that takes a type of energy and changes it into another type. And we go from mechanical energy of sound and acoustic domain into the electronic energy or electric energy in an electronic signal. Okay, so we go sound pressure level that varies over time, and now we have voltage that varies over time. Okay, now there is a bunch of factors that describe a microphone, and one of the problems with microphone and the understanding of it is that people try to just speak about one of the many different characteristics of a mic. I mentioned 11, I think. And some of them are totally essential to understand what a mic is. So often, because again, in the industry, you hear people that talk when they don't have a clue what they're talking about. And it's always fascinating when I hear people comparing microphones, but they would end up comparing different aspects of the microphone, like comparing a bike to a space shuttle. There's no comparison, not because the space shuttle is far more expensive, but they serve two different purposes. Okay, so you can, if you want to compare something, you have to compare apple with apples. So if you want to compare two mics, you have to compare the same aspect of the mic, or have an overview of all the different aspects for a specific application. Okay. So I'm rather passionate about microphones. You won't be able to get the full weight of my passion for microphones today, because we just look at kind of the basic 11 aspect of a mic. So let's start for the first one. The first one is the diaphragm. So let's just maybe define what a diaphragm is. A diaphragm is a very, it's like a disc, very, very thin, of a very, very thin light material, which is so thin and light that can move sympathetically to the movement of the air. Okay, so when I speak, just put your hand in front of your mouth like this. Say P and B, P and B, P and B. Can you feel the pressure? Can you feel the pressure? That's terrible to do, but okay, you can feel the pressure also there. But if you can think your hand can feel the air pressure of these two specific consonants, they're called explosive consonants because they explode. But obviously the other sounds that we produce also affect the air, like we seen, and these air moving, particles of air moving, affect the diaphragm. Now, on this mic specifically, the diaphragm is very, very small, okay? And the diaphragm moves, and according to that movement, the signal that is generated electronically is essentially proportional to the air movement. We'll speak a little bit later. Now, first thing to note is that the size of the diaphragm, like here we have a very small size compared to this. This is a larger size of a diaphragm. This is kind of, the diaphragm is somewhere there like this, like a disc. The diaphragm determines the frequency range. Inversely proportionally, if I can put it that way, the smaller the diaphragm, the wider the frequency range. For instance, this microphone is used for measurement, sound measurements. So it has to have pretty much the widest possible frequency range available, and that's why the diaphragm is so small. Because we want to measure everything from the lowest to the highest. Therefore, remember this: the smaller the diaphragm, the wider the frequency range. The diaphragm is very important because it determines a lot of how the mic sounds. The second thing we're gonna mention is the SPL handling. Now, all of this stuff, most of the stuff you will find in the specification of a microphone. This is possibly the most famous mic on earth with this one. This is the SM57, this is the SM58. Two SM57s are the mics used until recently by the President of the United States whenever he speaks, believe it or not. Two of these. With all the money they have, they use two of these. And I don't mean that ironically, it sells something. In fact, it can fall. But let's say you buy a 58. The specification of the SM58 will say most of the stuff I'm about to share with you. So if you understand what I'm saying, you'll be able to read them on a mic. So the second thing we're going to mention is the SPL handling, sound pressure level handling. Again, with technology improving, this value has really increased substantially over the last few years. So it's not as crucial as it used to be, but it's quite an important detail to know so that you can know how loud can this mic handle, even though it's the wrong way of saying it. But if you have a mic that can handle 80 decibel SPL, which is very low, you're not going to put it on a snare because the snare is far louder than that. Or you're not going to put it in the inside of a grand piano because both snare and inside of a grand piano can produce in the 130, 140 decibel SPL, which is a lot. So by knowing what application you need to cover or which instrument you need to mic, if you know that this is quite a high sound pressure level generating type of instrument, check the sound pressure level handling. It would be quite important because you might end up putting a mic on a source that cannot handle. So that's a small little detail, but very important. Again, I may be manic, but before I use any mic, I check all the specs. And I was doing a recording somewhere, and I was doing a piano, and the specs look, the mic looked right, but when I went to read the specs, I felt that if the pianist is really going to hit it, we are very, very close to not handling it. And so I eventually use another mic, just to give an example. The next one is the signal to noise ratio. And this is essentially how much tells us what is the signal that the mic generates versus the noise that it generates. Now, this is also very proportional to the diaphragm size. The larger the diaphragm, the higher the level compared to the noise. That's why, I don't know if you ever seen in studio, there's large diaphragms. The reason why there's large diaphragms there, again, this is partially true because technology has changed and has improved a lot of stuff. But it's to have a really great level before noise, meaning that if the guy sings very soft or if he speaks very soft, then we're not going to be in his area. Shh, oh yeah, shh, Okay, the signal is much louder than the noise. So generally, just to give you some kind of handles, if the handling of the SPL was 100 decibel, just to give an example, and the noise was 30, the signal to noise ratio is 70. Because it's the maximum amount of sound that it can handle minus the noise. Okay, so it sounds impressive, 100 decibel, but actually there's 30 decibel of noise. I'm just giving you these figures. These might be totally unrealistic. But these things are interesting to read depending on what type of application you want to have. For instance, if you have a mic that you want to use in recording for speech, then you better have something that's got a very little signal or very high signal to noise ratio, because when there's a voiceover, for instance, the guy is not going to shout. He's going to speak rather softly. It might project in certain passages, but in others it might be very, very soft. And if you have a very noisy mic, the minute you bring that mic up in a voiceover environment, you hear all that is. And that's not very clever. And how can you avoid that? By just reading the specs and by knowing what each specs represents. Okay, the next one, for me this is quite an important one because it's often underlooked. But before I explain the next one, which is the transient period, I would like to introduce you to something that's called the envelope of sound, which is essentially the life journey of a sound. Every sound, like a human being, is born, it lives, and it dies. So we have time here, and we have decibel here. If we had a sound like a clapping of the hand, every time I clap my hand, the sound will go from zero, no level, to it will spike up to the maximum level. So nothing, very high, but it doesn't die immediately after that. There is a there is a time that the level will be sustained for a while, and then at some point it will die down. It will ebb away. It will ebb down. Now, obviously, this is very, very, very simplified version of this whole description. But essentially, if you look at this, you can at least highlight 3 phases of the lifetime of a sound. The first phase we call attack with an A. The second phase we call sustain. And the third phase we call release. So you got an attack, you got a sustain, and you got a release. And this whole thing is called the envelope of a sound. It tells us the life story of a sound. Every sound has an attack, is born, it lives, and it dies. Sadly, every sound dies on Earth, but it remains in our head. Why is this important concerning mics? Because every mic will have an initial inertia. Inertia meaning a resistance to vibrating like the sound. So this is the diaphragm is still. For it to start to move, it needs a little bit of time to get going. Okay? Now that time would be this initial time here, transient, meaning going from no moving to moving, and therefore it will affect the way the attack is portrayed. So this is the envelope, acoustic envelope. Let's put it into the mic, and we might have the following. Okay, remember these are the sustain is like this, the release is like that, but the attack is a little bit on zero, and after a while it kicks in. Can you see the difference? Now this one would have eaten a part of that one. So this chunk here is gone. And that is the very beginning of the sound. It's where the sound is generated. Okay? Now I'm simplifying maybe a more complex argument, but it's okay for this discussion. So the transient period in a microphone describes how quickly the mic kicks in. Therefore, if it kicks in quickly, it preserves the envelope really rather well. Now, in some type of instrument, let's say like a percussive instrument, this is a rather important factor. Okay? So some microphones, for instance, have a better attack time or a better transient period than others have. Now, I had to go and choose a specific mic for a specific instrument, and I'm looking at a percussive instrument. I will obviously go for a mic that has got a fast transient period, because in that way I can preserve the naturality of the sound. Let me give an example. I hope I find it. If I don't, we'll cut it later. Let me give you two snares. The one is with a mic which has got a fast transient period. The other one is got with a mic that's got a slower transient period. Let me just find it. Yeah, here it is. This is a bass drum. Okay, here it is. This is snare with an also called a slower mic. This is snare with a faster transient period. Which of the two sounds more natural? The second one. Okay. Obviously, let me play it again. Let's just. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just make it sure. Okay, obviously there's other factors. The position is very different. So the second mic is not so close to the skin as the first mic. But despite the position, the actual sound is very different. Obviously due to the position partly, but mainly is also due to the fact that we're using two different mics, and the one is far more accurate in this environment than the other. Okay, can you hear the difference? Quite clear.